Welcome to Elevating La Cultura Podcast, a space where I talk with Latinas who are passionate about what they do and are willing to share that passion with others to change the narrative, especially for the next generation. Each season is centered around different topics, but all with a Latina perspective. Welcome to Season 7. I'm so excited to share these stories and hope they will offer encouragement, wisdom, and be something that you can relate to. So vámonos, and let's get into it. Hola! Today I'm talking with fellow podcaster Mónika from Our Latina Lens Podcast. Mónika is the founder of Our Latina Lens and Laancla Creative and is based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Through Our Latina Lens, she connects, supports, and elevates US-based Latina and Latine photographers. Mónika is a creative shapeshifter and specializes in supporting people through the use of various media to tell stories, whether it's through photography, community building, consulting on creative endeavors, or podcasting. She produces and hosts Our Latina Lens Podcast and PSC Mami Podcast. She was an arts educator for over a decade and creative director at Boston Arts Academy. She earned a Bachelor of Science in Journalism from the University of Florida and a BFA in Art Education from Massachusetts College of Art. As an organ donor recipient, she is also an ambassador for Donate Life and an advocate for patients with autoimmune liver diseases. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hello there. I am here today with Mónika, and I have had the pleasure of being on her podcast recently, and I am so excited to have her on the Elevating La Cultura podcast now. We met last year through the internet, and we have just been developing our relationship and our friendship since. And so I am just excited to get to talk to you a little deeper on the work that you do. But before we start, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Mónika, and I struggle with how to introduce myself. So I've landed on calling myself a creative shapeshifter because I am very much ideas based, and I sort of follow whatever whatever my brain comes up with, and then I figure out how to do it. So some of those areas right now are that I am a podcaster. I have two podcasts. The one you were on, Our Latina Lens Podcast, and then another called PSC Mami. I am a photographer. I am a business owner. I am a homeschooling mom. I'm part of the self-directed education movement. I'm a former high school teacher and creative director. All kinds of things. I'm a patient. I'm an organ transplant recipient. So all of those things are kind of pieces of who I am and how I function in the world. And I am currently in the Bay Area. I'm a military brat, so I've lived in lots of different places, and my current home is in the Bay Area. And I live here with my son, who is 7, and my husband.
I think that we connected on a few different levels when we first met. And one of the things that I really appreciated about you is this community that you are intentionally fostering, specifically around photography. And you mentioned that you're a photographer and you have your hand in the creative space. And I think that is so great to see, because it's a community that I did not have when I started my photography journey. And I just
Neither of us,
appreciate it.
right? Neither of us had it.
Yeah. And I think now that it's growing, like we see the disparity and the real need for this community, specifically for photographers and Latina photographers as well.
Absolutely.
I know that you mentioned a lot in that intro, and I'd love to dive a little deeper on how all of that kind of comes together. Like, what is the story of your journey that has brought you to where you are now?
So I think my being a military brat is actually really central to my identity. So my dad was in the Air Force and we grew up in lots of different places. I was born in Hawaii. I've lived in North Dakota, Virginia, Spain, Florida. My family settled in Florida. That's where my dad retired. And then I kept going. Dominican Republic, Boston, now the Bay Area. So I'm someone who's constantly seeking community. And I've gotten very skilled by necessity at developing new communities and finding new communities and sort of looking at what it is that I need. So I think that's really an important piece of the puzzle of how I operate in the world. And my story with photography started when I was little. I mean, I got a camera. I think I was probably 8 years old. I only ever think of things in like where I was living. So I only have like brackets of time, somewhere between 4 and 10. But I think I was about 8 where I got my first Mickey Mouse, 125 millimeter camera with the little pop flashes. And I just became the person who always had a camera on them, right? I wasn't necessarily the person who was fantastic at it or great at it, but I was just always taking pictures. And that continued through school. And I decided to go to college for photojournalism. I love storytelling. That's another really deep love of mine is storytelling. So I went to journalism school and I would say I was not ready for that experience and how it manifested for me. I encountered some professors who I think the kind way they just didn't know how to encourage someone like me. My dream at that point was to work for Latina Magazine. It had just started publishing. I love Latina Magazine, and I went to school and I told my advisor, I was like, I want to work in bilingual media, and he looked me straight in the eye and he's like, that doesn't exist. And in my head, I was just like, oh, you're not the person that's going to guide me to where I want to go. And then I went to my photojournalism classes, and there wasn't a lot of encouragement. It was very much like, you're not good at this. We're going to pay attention to these folks over here who are already pretty good. And also, when you go out, we want you to, take pictures of the burning houses. And I had a professor tell me that great journalism was going to death row and watching someone die. And like, that wasn't my area that I wanted to do like features and community and look at these amazing things happening. So the program that I was in definitely did not foster me in the way that I wanted to grow. And I think at that point in my life, um, my parents started college but did not finish. And they had always prepared us to just go to college, go to college, go to college. And we did that. And I know I personally had the experience that once I was there, I was like, and now what? Like no one prepped me for what happened after I got to college. Like, what do I do now? How do I get through this environment? What is my next goal? What does that look like? And I think in that respect, I ended up looking for a community, and I ended up in the Latino community. At my school, we had an Institute of Hispanic and Latino Culture, and the building it was called was an old house, so they called it La Casita. And I really connected with those communities. I started a chapter of a multicultural Greek sorority, and that was a place consistently that's been like where my comfort zone is sort of where can I find community that's going to hold me when this academic space is really not holding me. I got through it. I ended up graduating with a journalism degree. My dad said, listen, no one cares what your degree is in, just finish it. Because that was his experience. His experience was one where he felt doors were shut because he didn't have the piece of paper. So what he could pass on in his experience was, you just need the piece of paper and then you're going to be fine. Right. And in my experience, I think looking back now, that there's so much more to what college could be, should be. But I just didn't know. I didn't know that. And there was no one around me that could advise me in that. So I went on to work overseas and ended up doing education work because that's what was available. That's what my mentor, an outside mentor, sort of guided me to. And I loved that. And then came back from that experience to be an art teacher. As an art teacher, I went to art school. That's another story because in the college world, and I know in your episodes, people talk about their college journey and what we can learn from each other. Um, because of how things were written, how they looked, I was like, oh, I want to go to art school, but I don't have all these credits. I need 30 credits to get into a master's program. I might as well do another bachelor's. Who does that? I did that because I didn't know any better. Like now I look back and I'm like, that was really dumb. That was, or uninformed. It wasn't dumb. It was very uninformed decision that I made because, again, I had no one to say, what should I do? Where should I go? Right. And I went into art school and didn't plan on becoming a teacher. I wanted to work in community environments. That's where I had gotten my start. But I had an amazing opportunity to work in an art school. So I worked at the Boston Arts Academy in Boston. And that was just such an incredible experience for me, not only as a teacher, but as an artist, as a creative thinker, because I was able to be mentored by people who knew how to teach creatives and knew how to foster the joy in creatives and knew to say, you know what, the educational system is really rough on creative thinkers, really rough on artists. And at ninth grade, we're going to heal first. We're going to come together in community first. You're not weird. You're actually amazing. Let's make some great stuff together. And that's what I need. That's what 18-year-old me needed, right? Who had been in a program where they're just like, you don't have the stuff, right? Move on. So in that experience, I think I realized it wasn't so much that I was a bad photographer, is that I never had an experience to learn in a way that worked for me, learn in a nurturing, community-centered environment. I am very community centered and I need community in order to flourish. So, fast forward, 10, 12 years later, well, I'll back up a little bit. So, I was diagnosed with a rare disease called primary sclerosing cholangitis. And that is a disease that affects the bile ducts in your liver. And it is an autoimmune condition. There's nothing that I did or necessarily are able to do outside of just taking really good general care of my body to stop that process. And eventually you go into liver failure. And I was lucky enough to receive a liver transplant in 2017. That to me now, I'm in bonus time. I just had my 6-year anniversary from my transplant, and I do consider this my second chance of life. It is my bonus time. And I asked myself the question within that, now that you like literally have a second life, what do you really want to do? Not anyone's expectations, not what you should do, but what do you want to do? And it came back to that dream of my 18-year-old self, right? I wanted to be a photographer. And now I had this knowledge of like how I develop as an artist, how I develop as a photographer, and being able to seek out those resources on my own. When the pandemic hit, as a severely immunocompromised patient, I no longer felt comfortable being around people, even once other people started kind of coming out of isolation. So I wasn't photographing people as much, and I was spending time online, virtual summits, conferences, photo classes, all the things, beautiful things that people were offering during the initial pandemic months. And I just noticed at one point that my growing list of favorite photographers, I was like, how is it that there's not a Latina photographer amongst my like top 5 photographers or 10 or 20? Like, this is weird. This is weird for me. This is not how I operate in the world. So that began a quest of just asking others. And I knew a few Latina photographers who were either in education and, people would connect me to other people and I'd say, what communities are out there? And, I found out Enfoco is out there for fine art photographers, Diversify Photo, there's Women Photograph, but all of those to me felt a little less accessible to someone who was returning to photography and wasn't yet able to apply with a portfolio, wasn't able yet to show a body of work. And that was sort of in high school, we started at Latino Alliance. In college, I started, help found a chapter of a sorority. It's like, if I don't have what I need, like I know how to start this. And that was the beginning of Our Latina Lens. It was, all right, who do I know? All right, what do I have? I have Instagram. Let me start following this hashtag Latina photographer. Now I'm following probably about 320, 340 different Latina photographers on Instagram of varying levels. Amazing folks who are at the top of their game, working for celebrities and magazines and creating just incredible work. They're in the top galleries that I was like, I didn't even know. I didn't know that they were there. To students and beginning photographers who are just beginning their journey. And I just get so excited every time I find a new person to follow.
That is an amazing story. Thank you for sharing. And I can really see how each piece of your story has contributed to the next piece of your story. I think it's so relatable, your experience with higher education, because for people who are like first gen and like that is our goal to graduate college and get a degree. And so throughout our childhood, throughout our high school years, like that is the goal. And then once we're there, we're like, well, now what? What do I do with this? And it's always interesting because then the next goal is always get a good job. Okay, once you have a piece of paper, then you can get a good job. But what
Yes,
does that mean?
exactly. I had this
And
amazing colleague. I remember sitting in the office one him day. I was like, wait, we worked really hard to work really hard? Hold on. Something seems wrong here.
exactly. And especially for creatives, we're fed this narrative of the starving artist. And so we're like,
Mhm.
well, we're working hard, but for what? Like we'll get that piece of paper, but what does the next step? What is the next job that is supposed to support me when the society and like the world doesn't view or value art artists the same way as they would value other postgraduate jobs. And
Yes.
it's really hard to explain that to parents who are just like, oh, well, you got into college. Okay, now you have your degree, but what's your degree in? Bachelor of Arts? Like, what's that going to do? Where are you going to go get a job? And so it seems like the only next step is to continue going to school to get a higher level of education, to get that piece of paper to prove that, okay, well, maybe I can teach, or maybe I'll get hired somewhere because I have a higher piece of paper, higher
Mhm.
level of education. So it is, at least when I was going to school in the early 2000s, like that was the way of thinking. Thankfully, like as we graduated, we're also being more vocal about like, it wasn't as like clear cut as we thought it was going to be. And so we're trying to also educate the next generation on the reality
Mhm.
of higher education and do we really need that? And also trying to shift this narrative of the starving artist, because
Absolutely.
as like technology has shifted, like we are seeing the value of the arts and the value of creativity. So I am glad that you had that experience. I mean, it's sad that you didn't when you were trying to develop yourself as a photographer, but it seems like you were able to heal and move past that limiting mindset to
Mm.
then pursue and pursue the creative space in a positive way to then pour into your initial passion.
Absolutely. And, I continue now to tell people, remind people, like when the pandemic hit and we were all in isolation, most of us turned to creatives. We watched movies, we listened to music, we, engaged in what artists have made for us, and artists help us process the world. Artists give us, these conversations around national monuments and who should be memorialized. Those are made by artists, how they make them. So much around us is made by creatives. And as an art teacher and as the creative director at the school, like really imbuing in young people, saying, this is your superpower. Like, this is what you give the world. And how do you then create a living out of that? Right. And that's a whole other conversation we can go into about how artists are valued in our world, but also as I think one of my aha sort of, it's in process, money mindset changes, right? Is that someone said to me, like, your hours, that you have to separate like the hours you work from the money you make. And that just blew my mind. Like, that was not how, I was the kid who worked 3 jobs in high school and worked 3 jobs in college. And what do we need to do? And all right, there's a hustle. Let's do it. Let's make it happen. And for people to say, like, no, it's not actually your hours. Like, how are you making things happen in the world in a different way is just, again, there's so many shifts of perspective that you have, I think. My family, I'm second generation Puerto Rican. All of my grandparents were in the wave of migration in the 50s from Puerto Rico to New York. My parents are New Yorkers. And, I just feel with each generation, we're like learning more, right, of the like secrets of like, okay, how does this work? How does this society work? How does this culture work? And how are we a part of it? Not necessarily. And I think for me, you've mentioned many times in all the talks I've heard you do and on the podcast about assimilation. And I think the generation before mine, that was very much a mindset of like, how do we fit in this world? And for me, saying, how do we create space for us to support each other without having to, I've talked about like the duality of identity, right? Like that piece, without having to split ourselves, without having to hide or explain or exoticize ourselves. How do we continue to support people for who they are? So for me, Our Latina Lens set is about, you don't have to give up any of who you are. Like bring all of it to the table. I went to a Latina brunch yesterday and I was like, I brought my kid. I'm a homeschooling mom. Like, I'm bringing my kid. And I just had this deep knowledge that no one was going to care. They were just going to be like, yeah, come on in. And that's exactly how it was. It was a quote unquote professional event. And yet he was able to just sit there and be part of it because he is welcome in this space where, there are other spaces that I would know that would be frowned upon or be giving side eye or, whatever, however they might react to that space. But being able to show up as ourselves fully is really important. Um, and again, as a military brat, that's really hard for me sometimes because so much of moving is, how do I fit into this new environment? How do I fit into this new culture? Every state, every city has its own culture. And to be able to say, this is what I'm going to hold, this is my core self that I'm going to hold on to. And then here's how I will be part of a community, and figuring out how much of it is solid that you don't give up and how much of it is you can embrace the culture around you.
I can definitely relate to bringing your kid to a brunch. I have brought my kids to like coffee dates and coffee meetings, or like when I host events here, and I'm just like, oh, well, my kids walk in and ask me to unlock the iPad so they could continue their schoolwork. And so it's just like a normal thing. And I think the more that we shift that narrative with our children, this narrative of kids belong in a specific place, and it's always like the adults and then the kids, and like they always need to be separate. And if a kid tries to come into the adult space, like, oh, we're not talking to you, so like you don't belong here. And it was always this separated uh, thing. Like I think back to like the kids table or the kids room, and there's a point in growth that it's like those preteen years where you don't feel like a kid. You want to be involved, you want to be treated like you matter, your voice matters, you want to be given the space of being able to communicate and be part of something. And I think that's something that we are shifting because we understand how we felt and that we weren't taken seriously, and we were told what to think about our creativity or our daydreaming, or like it was always like a negative thing when we were growing up, at least for me. Like it was like, oh, you can't do this, or your sister does this better, so that's her thing, and your thing is this, so you need to stay in this lane. And it was always decided for me what I should be good at or what I was good at and what my parents would invest in. And they probably didn't realize how the comments affected me or my sister, or um, that I still think about them now, but it definitely has affected the way that I parent and involve my kids in conversation, in my business. They sit alongside me, they watch me edit photos, they know that I have meetings, they're um and I think this is something that I too had to kind of shift, because when I started wedding photography, I didn't want anyone to know that I had kids, because I had that mentality of, okay, well, as a wedding photographer, my clients don't want to know that I am thinking about other things other than their wedding. And so it was very much a split identity. And when I started creating something different, I was like, I have a full life and I want my kids to be part of it. And so, how can I make my life that is like bringing me joy, that I don't have to hide that I have kids, that they're like gonna come with me to the coffee house, they have their homework to do. Like, let's just build this together.
Absolutely. And it allows for so many conversations, on the as we left the restaurant yesterday, and I was talking to my son, I was like, every single woman at that table has a business. How cool is that? Right. And then we just happened to then have to go to the county records office, and he saw me filing by business paperwork. It's sort of like he's able to see a different narrative, um, and just options. I mean, for me, it's just sort of like, here's an option, and here's what these people do, and here's what those people do. And I think that the world that they're growing up in is so different than the world that we grew up in or I grew up in. I think that the larger narrative at that time was college is the way to go. And college was definitely more affordable. I mean, I graduated my first degree in 2001, and at that time in Florida, there was in-state tuition was incredibly affordable. That is not the case anymore, right? So the calculus on like the math does not add up sometimes now when you're looking at what you're going to school for. And I think it's a really important question to ask, why are you going? And that was a question that didn't even occur to me, right? Until, well, other than, like you said, to get a good job. I'm going to school to get a good job. Um, but when I went to art school in my form study class, was one of my very first classes. And the teacher went around the room and said, why did you come to art school instead of just renting a studio and making art? And that question blew my mind. I was like, what is she talking about? What is she talking about? What do you mean just go rent a studio and make art? And it was so drilled into me that in order to learn something, you had to go to college, that question just blew open a whole new world for me. And that is a question I ask every time I consider going back to school to get a master's, right? It's like, all right, that investment, what does it look like? What else can you do that would equate that, right? And I know that college isn't just now the degree, right? It is access to certain people, it is access to certain equipment and experiences, all the visiting speakers, the networking. I wish people had taught me more the first time around. Like, make sure that you are really connecting with your professors and your peers, and what does that mean in the future, and not in a like gross way, but just those are folks who later on you can talk to about what are they doing, or making, I love now making connections for folks. I mean, I think that's another reason why I'm excited about Our Latina Lens. I'm not holding myself up as a expert by any means, right, in the photo world, but saying like, let's create this really welcoming space for women and femmes where you can come in and you can share your expertise. Like, if you want to learn food photography from another Latina, we've got like 3 now, that we have access to, that are amazing and who can show those skills, right? We have folks who are incredibly good at branding. We have folks who are incredibly good at community business and creating spaces that are welcoming. And how can we just bring that together so we can network within each other and continue to have those resources stay in the Latino community or uplift our community? So many people now also that I'm connecting with, you and send us some photos, and other folks are saying, no, I want my studio to be in my community. Like, I don't want to go anywhere else. I don't want my rent check to go to someone else. Like, we are the community where I grew up. That's where I want to invest and become the artist that I want to be. And that's so beautiful. And to be able to just see that happening all over the country is just, I don't know. I get so excited every time I think about it and see people posting these beautiful achievements that they've defined for themselves.
Yeah, I think back to the first time that you had a community like Zoom meeting, and to just talk about photography for the hour was special in a way that I didn't know I needed. I think because thinking back, when I was starting my career in wedding photography, I had no Latina influences as a photographer. And there were no people that understood my lived experiences to be able to tell me this is how you build a wedding photography business based on how you want to build it. It was just like, okay, well, here's the formula. You should be able to go. And part of that formula was creating that dual identity. Like, you want your clients to be in this socioeconomic bracket, even if you're in this one, like you have to pretend to be at a higher financial level. And I was like, okay, well, this is what I've been told my whole life. So let's just keep going with that. And at some point, it's going to mess with your mental well being. And it was something I wasn't prepared for. And so, because I didn't have any Latina influences in the wedding photography industry and in photography in general, I think the only artist that I knew of throughout my education was Frida Kahlo. And when I started being part of your community and we would talk and look at other photographers' work, that's when my eyes were opened. And this was like just a few years ago, that there are photographers that have started to pave the way in the Latina lens, the Latina community, that we can be inspired by. And so I think that is one thing that I just felt seen. And so I thank you so much for creating this and facilitating this. I'd love to know how it's been from that first meeting. And I know I said that I met you like last year, but I think it's been 2 years.
Yeah, I think it's been 2
Yeah.
years now. Um, it's been a slow go. Like I said, I'm a homeschooling mom and I try to cherish the time. that I have with my little one. And so, but the vision of thinking about one, how to connect, I say connect, support, and elevate, thinking about how do we connect. That was the first step, right? Starting to connect people and then realizing, oh, we need some infrastructure that once we've connected, then what? So for the last year, I feel like I've been working on the infrastructure. But I want just to comment a little bit on how fun it was to find, right, those Latina photographers who have been paving the way. I don't know if you were in the meetup where we talked about Epifania, who, I have my very marked up book here from Elizabeth Ferrer of Latinx history in the United States. And the very first photographer that she talks about created daguerreotypes. And she was a young woman. And for those of you on YouTube, I'm just showing the picture of her. She was a young woman who was of means. So she had a daguerreotype camera and she created daguerreotypes. It is believed she created some of the first daguerreotypes in the state of California when California became a state. So to me, that is representative of, it is not recent that Latinas have been contributing to the visual narrative of this country. They have been doing this since the beginning of California, right? As California. And I know there's a lot there as far as history and how the states became the states. But for me, Our Latina Lens, in saying, like, let's talk to Elizabeth Ferrer, let's look at these different photographers, is like, who are the photographers that paved the way so that we don't have to feel like we're the first ones, right? Because there's so much pressure, there's so much like psychological things that go into like being the first, and it's ridiculous that we still have things that are the first, right? That in this day and age we're still doing firsts. But that there have been photographers, but they haven't had the access to the publications and the galleries so that we all know that they existed, right? That we all know that they have created this work. And there's starting to be, so I'm so grateful to Elizabeth, there's starting to be more people saying, wait a minute, let's go look at what's out there. And they're not in the museums, unfortunately. They're in people's attics, and they're like starting to say, where do we go and find these records of what has been created so that we can then build upon it. We can continue to build and not feel like we're the first. So that's, to me, the piece about really elevating the when I say past, present, future, right? That what is our past? What is our visual narrative in this country? And I refuse to believe there hasn't been one. Just hasn't been documented. So I'm excited. Well, I'm a lover of history. I'm not a historian. But if there's any like people who love history and visual arts out there, like, I'm so excited for you to go and find these women and these femmes and like educate us about them, right? There's so much, I believe in my heart, there's so much more to discover and connect. And there was another train of thought that I've totally lost of where we were going.
No, I love it. I always try to bring that historical piece into conversations because it is such an important piece of reclaiming our like place in, and maybe place isn't, because we've been here. Like we've been here, and
Exactly.
it's just a matter of being able to uncover that and finally bring it to light. Yeah. So, how has your community continued to develop?
That was it.
Yes.
So thank you. So I've been working on infrastructure. I've been working on the podcast. So another piece of elevating voices of Latina and Latina photographers has been the podcast, and being able to just give another platform for accomplished Latina photographers to share their story and share their work. I'm super excited about the image tours and how that really allows folks, as an art teacher, so many times I've heard, I don't know how to look at art. How do I, decide what piece of art to buy or collect? And so being able to ask artists, ask photographers, tell us about this work, help us look at it, help us look behind the scenes and its significance, I think is really special. And then we are also I have gotten lots of DMs. So once we went live, I get a DM every once in a while that's like, "Can you suggest this kind of photographer in so and such city?" So that just has brought us to creating right now. We're finalizing our Latina Lens National Directory of Latina and Latina photographers. So we'll be populating that in the next few months and going live so that um, the goal is to have photographers in all 50 states because I know they're there. So being able to have a place that people can go and say, I need branding photography. I need to hire someone for a commercial shoot. I need a baby photo, photographer, whatever it is that you need that would be there. And then continuing to have reinvigorating the uh, monthly conversations, being able to have that space to just connect in whatever way the people who show up need to. We've talked about creating critique groups. So being able to support each other and look at each other's work and have a safe space to grow and help each other grow. Um, I love critique. I love the idea of critique and being able to show others, like, how do you critique in a way that doesn't feel terrible? Like, how do you critique in a way that helps build each other as artists? That's really exciting. So right now, the major places are on Instagram and our growing website, which is the podcast, the directory, and continuing our connections. In the future, hoping to have an online community space. That's a future vision. And a future vision is regional events and a national conference. But that'll probably be a couple of years away.
That's so exciting to like hear that. And I know that I want to go back and mention something that you said, that as a homeschool mom, sometimes things in your business like take a little time. And I think that's something that I have had to learn to accept, because as someone who is always producing, or I was always producing, and when people were looking at me building my business and my wedding photography business, when I didn't talk about my kids and they found out that I was a homeschool mom. I mean, it was in my kids' early years, so there really wasn't much to do in their preschool years. But when I started like actually taking them through a curriculum, I realized that the like it's almost a part-time job to do homeschooling and also be building your business. So I was like doing double load, and like that led to burnout, and I had way too many high expectations for myself, and I had to ask the question, which one is a priority? And to me it was both. I was like, I have this in me to be an entrepreneur, to create this business, but I also have it in me to be a homeschool mom. And I looked at the goals that my kids had and the goals that we had as a family. And I was like, you know what? I just have to accept that I'm going to do both. And it's going to take a little bit of extra time to build my business in the way that I envision it. And that's okay. And I think, especially during those pandemic years, it really sunk in for me that like I need to take time to rest. If I'm going to be pouring myself into both aspects of my life, I need to make sure that I'm leaving room to like take care of our family relationship as well. Um, so, for anyone who is thinking about homeschooling, it is a lot of work. It is so worth it, and there just comes a time where it's natural. Like that's just how life is. Like you bring your kids along on coffee dates. It's normal for them. It's normal for us. We're building our business and we're educating them, and it's like just your whole life. And there's no separate parts. And I think that's what the journey that I've been on in healing my dual identity, and saying like, this is all of me and I'm going to do it all, and I'm going to do it. It might take me a little longer, but I'm going to be fulfilled in both areas of my life.
Absolutely. And once you start questioning, right, how things are, the set path before you, you start questioning everything, right? And you start seeing different connections and saying, oh, you witnessing building a business, me building a business is part of your education, right? And we practice self-directed education, so we don't follow a curriculum. You know, it's very led from what my son's passions are, and my following my passions, right, is modeling how do you figure it out. How do I figure out, all right, I need to go take this paperwork and here's how I ask questions, and I need to go figure out how to pay taxes, and I need to, you know, like come along with me. Like you're going to see your mom asking a lot of questions because I was trained as a teacher, not as an entrepreneur. And I think all of that sinks in. So for me, him being part of that journey is also part of his education and how you grow as a curious human being. He has as of yet not really shown much creative inclination, but even the act of curiosity, I think, will serve him in any realm that he's in.
Yeah, I love I think one of the biggest mindsets in, and I know we're getting on a tangent by talking about homeschooling, but I think one of the biggest mindsets as a parent is to get out of that curriculum mindset, because it's like, oh, well, I just need to get all of their subjects in, and I just need to buy a curriculum so that it's like, okay, check all the boxes. And like that's how I started. But over the past, oh man, 2, 3 years now, we've like kind of gravitated to a more self-directed lifestyle as far as like homeschooling goes. And it is so liberating and it's so fun. Um, but I don't,
Wait till you have you discovered game schooling yet? Because that's like another, I mean, people educate their children entirely through games. How fun is that? We're going to a game schooling conference next month, and I'm super excited about it.
oh my gosh, I'll have to get the info afterwards, but that sounds amazing. But yeah, I think it's this when we allow ourselves to tap into that creativity, which we're all like, we all have it. Sometimes it's just been like stuffed down inside of us. But when we tap into that, we open ourselves for the possibility of doing things differently, including school and education for our kids.
Absolutely.
So tell me, what are your big goals for the year?
So this year definitely is getting the national directory up and running, populated. If you're a photographer listening, please follow us so you can get on that directory. The idea of being able to, again, selfishly, if someone DMs me and asks for a photographer in Atlanta, that I could be like, here's the directory, go find them. Or St. Louis, or, you know, all the places, because I've met, you know, again, there, I am now connected to Latina photographers in Montana and Nashville and Wyoming. And, you know, every time, especially when I find out in those Western states, I'm like, yes, okay, we're everywhere. We're everywhere. So that is a big goal, continuing with the podcast. And now next step will be planning and creating a more, I don't know what to call it, not stable, but a community in the cloud, a virtual community where people can really connect there. And it's not just reliant on those monthly Zoom meetups, that people can connect in different ways on their own, and making a space for that to happen. So I am also, you know, returning to tomorrow. I have a whole studio day where I'm taking pictures of people. So I'm super excited to return to that aspect of my life and continuing to take pictures and developing myself as a photographer. I had that big break, and I am grateful that I had the break to develop Our Latina Lens, because, you know, busy photographers don't have time to develop communities. So while I wasn't able to be a busy photographer, I was able to lay this groundwork, and I'm super excited where it might lead.
Yeah, that's exciting. And if you could package some advice or encouragement for the next generation, what would that be?
Play more. I find joy, be playful in your life. I think that as an art teacher and later as a parent, and there's actual research if that's what we need to listen to play and joy and pleasure in our lives, about how important for human beings it is to engage in something where you lose track of time because you're having so much fun. And like I said, the success and the working hard to work hard only leads to burnout, as we've both discovered in our own lives. And as early as you can cultivate a practice of play, I think whatever it is that you pursue, you'll be able to maintain it in a way that's more healthy for your body and your soul and your spirit.
I love that. That's a perfect way to end. But before we do, where can people find you?
Absolutely. So Our Latina Lens is on Instagram. We're on LinkedIn, most active on Instagram at Our Latina Lens. Our website is ourlatinalens.com, where you can find the podcast. And from there, you can subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, you can probably find our podcast. And then my personal Instagram is Laancla Creative, Laancla Creative, and laancla.com is my personal website where I have all my creative musings and all the things that don't make sense to anyone else but my own brain.
Yes, and if you are listening and you are a Latina photographer or know one, like let's get on this community meetup, because they are a really great way to connect and just kind of focus on our own skills and meet other people across the country. Anyway,
Absolutely.
thank you so much, and I'm sure I'll see you.
Karina.
Yes, I'll see you at the next meetup.
Great, thank you.
All right, bye. Her passion and desire for community shines through with each of our conversations. I hope that as a collective, we can start shifting the way we think about creative careers and perhaps be more open to inviting creativity in our own lives. If you haven't joined yet, please join the Elevating la Cultura Comunidad on Facebook, where we can continue the conversations we have on the podcast. And sometimes I go live spontaneously, so if you're wanting another way to connect with me and go deeper on the episodes and talks we have on the podcast, join the Facebook group. Okay, amigos, there'll be a new episode every Tuesday, so after you listen, feel free to take a screenshot, post on Instagram, and tag at Elevating La Cultura, or send me a DM. You can also comment on our YouTube video if you're watching online. I always like to hear from people and how they resonate with the stories that I share. So leave a review on Apple Podcasts so we can get more ears listening to these stories and we can continue elevating la cultura. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day, afternoon, evening, whenever you're listening, y nos vemos next week. Bye.